Okay.
Okay. Well, here we go. We are starting. We are officially podcasting. Um, I can hear myself pretty well. Can you hear yourself okay?
I definitely can, yeah.
We're just going to be casual here, right? Because we both know this isn't really going to be published, and if it is, it'll be edited out. Anyway, I am so excited to join the world of podcasters. This is something I've been looking to do for a long time, and I think it takes a lot to push on through and to do it instead of just not doing it. Folks, for anybody that's out there, I'd like to introduce the show and the people behind the show to you. We're calling our funky little podcast Pie the Corner. If you guys don't know Pie the Corner is, you might want to Google it because I'm sure not going to tell you. The main hosts of the show are going to be Patrick Ford, and myself, Shane Orr. We're broadcasting from Austin, Texas. The date today is January 2nd, 2020, and this is episode 1. And I do hear myself popping like crazy, so I'm probably going to have to put a windscreen on eventually, but hey, just deal with it. Anyways, how you doing today, Pat?
I'm doing good, man. It's good to talk to you and finally get this going. We've been talking about doing this and trying to get it set up through different, iterations, whether, depending on the app we were using for a while now. And so it's kind of good that we've sort of settled on this way to do it, I guess.
Right, and just to further your point, it's just the hardest thing in the world is to start something. Trying to get something going from a stop is next to impossible. I consider myself a pretty technical person, and I could not get my computer to work. I could not get my speakers to work. I could not get my microphone to work. But hell, we persevered. I mean, we've been trying to do this for 2 months.
Maybe more. And, it reminds me of that book that we read, The War of Art. Like the resistance that comes up where even though as excited as I get, thinking about doing it, the time comes and it's like, oh man, I hope this works and I hope we get it working. It's so weird.
Absolutely. I mean, listen to me. Was there a part of you today that was looking for reasons why we couldn't do it today or why it might not work or maybe another day would be better? I know there was in my mind.
Absolutely. Well, it's weird because, even up to the moment, you're just like, okay, are we going to really do this? It's like maybe he'll want to cancel or maybe my computer's going to break down or something. It's a strange thing for sure.
Right. And then lo and behold, we queue up and everything we've tested and, crossed twice, dotted twice, all of a sudden it wasn't working again. But here we are. So anyways, I'm so glad we're here today. Yes. So just the other day, we were talking about what we're going to talk about today. And I mean, it's the first episode and we talked about how politics and elections were being kind of timely. And, rather than just dig deep and try to decide the perfect topic, I just threw it out there that we talk about socialism today because that's definitely something to talk about. A lot of people talk about it every day. People talk about why it's a good idea, why it's a bad idea, why it works for some countries, why it doesn't work for those countries, why it would be good for America, and why it would be the worst thing ever for America. So I would like for you and me to talk a little bit about our own thoughts about, what we think socialism is, and just generally kind of discuss the discourse in America around socialism and see if we learn anything from the conversation.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And I when you brought the idea up, I thought it was really prescient. I mean, obviously we have a presidential candidate right now, Bernie Sanders, who is sort of an unabashed socialist, I guess, or democratic socialist, I guess is what he would refer himself to himself as. So I think it really does kind of play into what our country is going through. The inequities that we're facing, I mean, which is, almost one of those things that everybody knows what it is. And, they know that there's a problem here. And is capitalism the problem or is it the cronyism of capitalism or what? So, like we talked about or like we, said to each other earlier in the week, I'll just throw that question out to you, Shane. You can kind of give me your idea. What do you think socialism is, or how would you define socialism in the world today or in your world?
Okay, that's a really good question, and I'm going to have to think about that for a little bit. But before I think about it, I'm just going to start talking.
Sure.
And in general, we have these terms socialism, with the root word social. We have ism and we have social. And these are systems of organizing ourselves and, trying to govern ourselves and trying to make a societal system that hopefully benefits the whole instead of just the individual. The classic take on capitalism is capitalism is such a great wealth creator that if you just let it run unabated, eventually it will create enough wealth to where that wealth will spread and everybody will be happy. As we see today, there seems to be problems with that system. I wish capitalism worked the way that it's predicted to work, but it's a theory. Capitalism is a theory, and we are enacting it into a system. And in our experiment, a lot of the theorized results of capitalism are not being achieved. And so this leads us to ask the question: is there a way we can amend capitalism? Can we fix its shortfalls and stick with capitalism, or do we need to consider admitting that capitalism isn't achieving the goals that we wanted to achieve, and maybe we need to look into another system that may exist or may need to be created for another way to govern our society to meet the needs that we would like our societal systems to meet. That's a little rambly, but so let's go back to socialism. My take on socialism, without getting into real theoretical semantics, would be, in a socialist system, the idea is that we pool our resources and work together in order to have more power of shared resources, in order to it's a classic spread the wealth scenario.
Yeah.
And a lot of people believe that the lowest of the low in society shouldn't go below a certain base threshold. And I think socialism helps with that, whereas capitalism ignores that interest. And that's really problematic for a lot of people. And there's becoming a rising chorus in America that is demanding that we do something about this gross poverty and this gross inequality that we face every day, driving down the street, going to the work, going to grocery stores. And the main thing is about trying to raise the poorest of the poor, really to give them a leg up. That's my take on it. At least let's start the conversation with that. Can you add some points to what I said?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so obviously the traditional idea of socialism is something that came out of the Marx school of theory, which was really a criticism of capitalism. And the criticisms that were brought forth through Marx, that a lot of people kind of espouse, are as follows: a few. So you have a system where the means of production are controlled by a small few people, and the people that are on the other side that are working their butts off every day trying to just make a living in the world are getting the short end of the stick. Meaning, for instance, if you're the guy that's out there working your butt off and you're making $20 an hour for some major corporation, and that corporation's making billions of dollars a year, when what you're doing per hour is bringing, say if you're making $20 an hour, that corporation could be making $1,000 an hour off that one person, if you want to split it up that way. And so the inequity there is quite obvious, right? You go home at the end of the day, you feel like, I feel like I got ripped off somehow. You're tired, you're stressed out, and you hope for the corporation or the company or whoever you're working for to throw you a bone. Some of the other things that capitalism has been discussed as doing is obviously driving that inability to take care of yourself, take care of your basic needs, food, shelter, education in some cases now. If we look at how hard it is or how much it costs to go to school. We also have something that I've looked into recently that I really think is true is that it breeds a sense of isolation for people. And I mean that in this way, that you get to a point where you're so tired at the end of the day, you work your butt off all day, you go home, you don't have time to really be a realized person. So what do? Well, you go out and you try to realize yourself in the way that it was set up by the system, by the capitalist system. You go watch sports, you drink beer, you get high, you go to bars, you have a family. And again, that's not a bad thing in and of itself, of course, but that stuff that people do that gives them a sense of, well, I'm making it in this system because I have a spouse, I have kids, I have a nice car, I have a house, when really you're kind of treading water. And it also goes to this idea of, say like over 100 years ago, when there was no super formed capitalist system, what you had was you did the work that you needed to do to make help your family survive. And hopefully that was enough to keep going. And it could have been more than 100 years ago. But what happened was the wages then were going up. So if you had something between like late 1800s through 1950, maybe 60, wages were going up and people were getting a sense that what they were working for was sort of that American dream, where eventually they were going to have, that feeling, that sense of like security. What happened is that corporations decided like, oh, wait a second, this is costing us too much to pay these people and give them health care and give them this sense of achievement. So they started offshoring jobs and taking them to other places where they could pay, in other countries you can pay people, instead of paying them $20 an hour or $10 an hour back then, you could pay them 30 cents an hour or 40 cents. And
so when you say it was costing them too much, was it costing them too much, or did they just get greedy, or did they just want more?
Well, and that's a great point, because I think that's where that convergence of the inequity and the desire to have this idea that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps with capitalism is because they were greedy, and that capitalism in itself as a theory, just like socialism, can be done in a utopian perfect way. But what really is happening is you have human beings. It's something that is real humans acting on the system, and humans are generally greedy, and the more that they get, the greedier they get, and they think, well, this is my business, why am I not making more?
Absolutely. And I'd like to address what you said right there by the theory, and basically what you were about to say. The fundamental problem is not the systems, it's human nature, and that's why we try to craft these systems to either kind of inspire the best aspects of human nature, and that's what capitalism does, as far as innovation and aspiring for invention and moving forward and whatnot. But socialism, basically tries to guard against the exploitation of people, which is inherent in capitalism, and you touched on that too. Basically, there's in some certain capitalist theory, they talk about how, labor and capital are equal partners, that one can't do one without the other. And this was a historical thing that people used to teach and cling to. But more recently, I would say, probably all the way back to the 50s, when they started decimating and dismantling the strong labor, the labor movement and the unions in America, that basically that contract was thrown away, and it's been out of proportion. Capital for people say 40 years, but I'd say 40, 50, 60 years in America already, and that's where we've gone awry. Labor is not being valued, and these corporations, any capital, you don't even have to say corporations. I know it's really popular to demonize corporations these days, and it's probably warranted. But at the same time, corporations do a lot of great work around the world.
Yeah, yeah.
Why? Because they are run by human beings, and human beings are imperfect. They do great things and they do horrible things. And our discussion today about these systems is trying to enact a system that can actually help move more people forward than less, but still guard against those base instincts of humans that mess up every system and lie and cheat and steal and get greedy. That's never going to go away. So we have to have systems in place to guard against these base instincts of humanity. And historically, I think for small windows in time, it's probably just decades, we've had these systems in place. And to me, that proves me that we can do it again. But there's a lot of mass mind manipulation going on, propaganda, mass media, social media, whatever. And we have to learn how to do this. We don't know how to do this because it's brand new. And this is a learning process, and what we're trying to do is probably going to take decades, but we have to have the conversation, and so that's why we're here today.
Yeah, that's well said, and I think that's kind of like a sort of a jumping off point, right? Because I mean, we have a situation now where, take unions for example. That's a great one because union busting was a thing. Like they would send out
Absolutely.
They would send out armed militias to go out and beat the hell and kill these people, beat the hell out of them and kill them and run them off. And I mean, it was like, it's this virulent strain in our culture that's one side says like, this is mine, you're not taking it.
It's greed. It's not our culture. It's inhumanity. It's greed, brother.
Yeah, you're probably right.
So listen to this. When were things best for workers in America? What was the high point? What was the apex of time in America when it was best for the workers? I would say the mid 50s to 1970.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that time frame, and I'd also
say that overlays precisely with the peak of the labor movement in America. The downfall of labor and wages and everything directly corresponds with union busting. And this is never addressed in the historical record. There's revisionist history, and they basically turned the tables and whitewashed it, and now they lie to us to our face, and they tell us that unions are bad, and unions are bad for us, and that we don't want unions. And they're even trying to criminalize unions all over this country. And we need to change the conversation and educate people and make people realize that the only power they have is when they organize and work together for a common cause.
Yeah, and think about that, man. I mean, and I was going to say the other era I think was good was the progressive era, which is, anywhere from 1900, 1920, where they people stood up and said, well, no, we don't want to work 18 hours a day and 7 days a week, and we don't want our 10-year-old son to be out there in a mine. And they did have a lot of success sort of putting in that standard of what we see today, which is like the 8-hour day, 40-hour work week. And then that sort of
and how did they achieve these successes? Did they just ask pretty please?
No, of course not. Well, that's where a lot of that agitation and what do you call it? Just like what they're doing in Hong Kong, protests,
civil disobedience,
protests, things like that they couldn't deny because it really did kind of bring the system to a stop, to the point where
this reminds me of something that Noam Chomsky was somebody that I read probably when I was 20 years old, and he really opened my eyes to certain things. One of the main thing is that no government is the friend of the people. I get it that you can like the personality qualities of a president. You can think he's handsome. You can like his wife. You can think he has a good family. But no sitting president or no government is the friend of the people. We have to hold them accountable. And so right. So I can't remember what I was going to say.
Well, it goes to...
basically, Noam Chomsky, back to the Noam Chomsky thing, one of kind of his one of his main talking points that he uses over and over again, it might be the talking point he's most famous for. He says change isn't gifted from the top down, it's demanded from the bottom up. And this is basically what I'm talking about. It's what I talk about all day, every day. People think if you just elect the person that makes you these pretty promises, that they're going to follow through with them and you're going to get everything you want / everything they promise you. It does not work that way.
Yeah, and I think we can certainly both agree on that point, because we see that played out every day. All of our politicians, I mean, we say all, I would say all, but I don't obviously mean everyone.
Well, of
but
course not. We're generalizing.
But again, that is sort of that's sort of the image of a politician now. I mean, everybody, even people who support them and support, the raw, idea of our capitalist American society, even they go, oh, they're all crooks, we should throw them out. So, I mean, there's a common thread there where we all feel like something's wrong. And, so it kind of goes to that point of, what do we do? How do we change that? How do we fix that? Does it have to, I mean, because my feeling right now, after researching for the past, several days on this stuff, is I don't think it's like, oh, well, we just replace it with socialism and everything will be fine. Because there's a lot of, if I wanted to play devil's advocate, there's a lot of negative things that can happen that way too.
Absolutely. Like, and history has shown us that.
Right, on both sides, right? I mean, so we're the history of capitalism, and then the history of socialism is a lot of other places. But I would say, like, if something like what Bernie Sanders talks about, democratic socialism, the idea that it's more of it's not a political socialism, it's more of a social socialism, I guess you could say, instead of
which we talk about on a weekly basis, which we already do in so many ways. It would not be that much of a stretch for Americans to embrace some kind of hybrid blend of capitalist socialism or capitalism socialism.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, where do we start though? I mean, so let's explore that a little bit.
Let's start with Medicare for all, because I think that's really the elephant in the room, and that's the apex of the culture war for some freaking dumb reason.
Yeah.
One half of this country, the Republicans have half of this country believing that taking care of 100% of this country's medical needs is somehow scandalous and criminal. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, I would say that, the recent polls kind of say that there actually is some support on conservative sides. Of course, there's a lot of different sides in America, Shane.
Well, it depends. It depends on how you frame the question, doesn't it? I mean, if you call Medicare for all Obamacare, nobody's for it. If you call it the Affordable Care Act, they might be a little bit for it. For some reason, once we started framing the debate as Medicare for all, we started losing people again, and I'm not sure why that happened. I feel like it's a pretty innocuous word, Medicare for all. It just doesn't seem like a scandal to me.
Well, here's where I think some of that comes from, and it's something that I can sort of understand. So, where I work, and I won't say where, but we have really, really good health care, right? And I mean, it's like some of the best that you can get. And even times I've gone in and seen specialists, gone into the doctor, taken my family in to see a doctor, the nurses will comment like, wow, this is great insurance. And I think there's a fear that we're going to have to give that up. If we do Medicare for all, then everybody gets this base system that
you're right.
All these horror stories from Canada and the UK and Europe where people are waiting 24 hours to see somebody when they're sick,
or even weeks.
Yeah, and so that's why people think, that's what I think is one of those things that is an easy propaganda piece. It's like, if you do this, you're going to be waiting 2 days.
You're right, but that's the classic propaganda piece. It's fear mongering. Yeah. I will agree with you that some of the more fortunate people in our society that maybe have the best healthcare coverage available for sale probably do get really good coverage, and they probably are scared that it may be replaced by something that doesn't meet their needs as well.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people have shitty coverage, even fairly wealthy people, because the insurance plans suck. And I just so you're right on that. The main thing is that's one. Just let me finish with this real quick. One of the things is, okay, fear of losing quality coverage. But the other thing is that I thought of when you were talking is there's this prevailing notion in America that, like, the people that don't have health care, it's their fault that they don't have it.
Yeah, they earn it.
And so America has this, kind of real rugged individualist bootstrap mentality, which I call total bullshit on, but it's part of our mythology. And people are scared that if you give people free insurance, you know what I mean? Free insurance, even though it's not fucking free, we pay for it with taxes.
Yeah.
If you give it to them free, that they'll just be lazier and they won't work and they'll become unappreciative, and then it'll just be like a welfare state, because these images are so powerful. They've been painted so intricately and they're so powerful that they're hard to get out of people's heads.
Well, and this really, that's a great point, and it made me think of something that we've talked about before in our personal conversations. This idea that, if you're poor, then you must not be working hard enough. And, it's amazing what they've done. And when I say they, I say conservative think tanks, media of all kinds, is all of these corporations or these big, companies that are sort of responsible for offshoring a lot of jobs that pisses people off. And I'm going to get back to the healthcare thing, but I think this is an important part of this, is they have this thing where they go do that, and then they go, oh, well, all these immigrants are coming in and taking your jobs. All of the poor people that are working like and I mean, it's not just immigrants, it's like poor white people, poor blacks, poor whatever, working 2-3 jobs, still not able to make ends meet. They somehow got this middle class, I guess, part of our culture, our society, to believe that it's their fault that things are bad, and that if something is good for these people that are completely destitute, essentially, then that's going to mean that it's going to be taken from you. Mm-hmm. Which reality is, it probably is, because that's where they're going to take it from to do it. But it's them taking it, the leaders, the powers that be, not the poor people. They don't have a choice, right? They're going to take whatever they can get. I mean,
well, I agree with you to an extent. I agree with you to an extent when you say that's probably how it's going to be. That's probably how it's going to be if the trajectory doesn't change. But we have the power to change the trajectory. And the question is, there absolutely has to be a redistribution of wealth in our society. Historically, that's what's worked the best. That's what we need. That's what we will need forever into eternity. And until we realize that, we may just not be okay. We are really going to touch on some phrases here that the mainstream news, I don't even know what that means anymore, but you would never see somebody propose the redistribution of wealth the way I am. It's the only way forward.
Well, and that's, again, I was just going to say, like, that is that buzzword that just scares the shit out of people.
Oh, you lose everybody.
You mean me that makes $50,000 a year? You're going to take all my money?
You mean somebody's going to get something for nothing?
Yeah, and it's like, there's people, and I think Bernie Sanders does a great job of making this argument that billionaires, that is a level of money where you have to have somebody at the bottom to make that kind of money. You're making it off of the backs of that kind of a person. So, this would be an area where socialism would come in and go, that is clear exploitation, and I would tend to agree with that. Now, to play devil's advocate, or maybe not, I would look at somebody who's a private business person, and I would say that's you, and I won't say what you do. You can decide if you want to tell people that. You're an entrepreneur. You pay your employees very well for the work that they do, right? So the argument on a socialist side would be, well, they're getting this amount per hour while he's making this much off of this 4 hours or whatever, 8 hours of work. but that, because this is the part that I think scares people. It's like, well, but there's a lot more to what you're doing behind the scenes for your business that would lead you to make that, you know what I mean? That you are earning that. It's not like you're sitting there going, ha 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 ha, I've got you now. You're doing all my work for me. You're doing a ton of that work, you know? And
just to share this story, and you're right on. I can remember some of my very first jobs because I've always had a keen eye and I've always been an observer. And, I've always done the math, like my very first job was at a place called Del Taco. I'm sure some people around the country remember Del Taco. Way back in the day in the 80s, they were a pretty fierce competitor with Taco Bell. As far as I know, there's really not many Del Tacos left other than the West Coast.
They're still around. They're definitely.
But there's not very many, and they're mostly West Coast. But that was and that's irrelevant. That was my very first job when I was 15 years old, and I made $3.35 an hour. And you go ahead and work a 6 or 8 hour shift, and you work the cash register. Look at all the wealth being created around you, and at the end of 8 hours, you might have brought home like $20. The first 2 tickets you rang up were probably $20. So somebody who's paying attention, you just get a real sense of the imbalance there, and basically the exploitation of your labor. You may have already studied it in high school. You may have studied it in college. That capitalism is based off the exploitation of labor, but I don't think most people really think about those words and what they really mean. It's something like it's in a vacuum or a theory, like, oh yeah, the exploitation of labor. No, that's not the exploitation of labor. That's basically like stealing your labor. And you're based, like your point earlier, you're making them hundreds to thousands of dollars an hour, and they're paying you, $5, $10, $20 an hour.
Yeah.
And good for them. They have the capital, they have the idea, they have the entrepreneurial spirit. But you just cannot bleed people dry. There's a balance to it. I'm not giving my employees too much money. I'm not giving them money I can't afford, but I'm giving them more money than I have to.
Yeah,
that's,
exactly.
That's just something to think about. You're taking care of your people. Like,
that's right.
It's not about just bleeding people so dry that when they quit or when you fire them, that you just replace them with another machine. This just not the way the world is. There's a lot of capitalists think of it, but it's a system doomed for failure.
Yeah, and I mean, you've been very, very honest and forthright about wanting to do that and taking care of your people, and I always admired that. And I think it's like we need more of that on and that's a micro scale because you're an entrepreneur, you're a one person guy operation. They need to take that wider, and because there's arguments where I work, like, well, we don't make enough to live in this area because the cost of living is going up, and it is, and so it's like, well, we pay you competitively for the the type of job you do. Yeah, but it's like, is that what we really want to do? I mean, do we want to do that, or do we want to step out there and be like that dude who paid all of his employees, like, gave them all a raise and their minimum wage is like $70,000 a year? And it's because the argument is like, well, we need that for development and we need that for research and da-da-da-da. Okay, well, how much do you really need, though? I mean, it's like, who's solvent here? What, I mean, it's like you're preparing for some time that's going to come when everything goes to crap and you lose all your money. I don't know, it's like I guess that's part of this conversation is just like, what does that mean and how can it be distributed, without it becoming like a thing that's a problem.
Okay, so let's touch on something else right now. Let's go back to socialism, because that's kind of the overarching theme of this conversation. I think we both know that anytime we have a theme for a podcast or a conversation, we're probably not going to stick to it that much. We're probably going to be all over the place because it's our show and we're going to talk about what we want to talk about. But we're talking about socialism. Let's address this is a little bit different of a take on it. A lot of people think socialism is unfair, and I think that's really funny because a lot of the people that kind of cling to socialism and espouse it and even study it historically are coming from a place where they want to make things more fair, more just, more equitable. But there's all kinds of poor people all over America that believe socialism is unfair.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, well, they're very well, they're taught. So this is again, there's the education system does not do a good job of explaining to them what's been happening to them and what's happening to their families and their loved ones. And I think you're right. I mean, they're able to get them to the point where they're like, the whole idea that I'm not poor, I'm just a temporary a millionaire that's temporarily down on his luck.
Right,
this idea that if I just keep pushing, one day that lottery ticket's going to come in and I'm going to hit the jackpot with my job or whatever, which it doesn't happen, right? I mean,
Right.
A small portion of people, I don't know, what would you say percentage wise is the portions of people that work hard, so hard, and they finally do. It doesn't have to be a billionaire. What if that person that makes $1 million? I mean, what's the percentage of people that get to a point in their job where they're making $1 million? I mean, it can't be that big.
Let's don't even think about $1 million. But in my experience, when I see this proverbial rags to riches stories, where they started with odd jobs, they took multiple jobs, they saved money, they invested, they worked their way to the top, so to speak. I mean, look around you. I'm 49 years old. You're in your 40s. How many people, if any, do you know that's done that? I mean, it's a number that's close to zero.
Yeah.
When you first asked me a percentage, I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to guess that. But then I started thinking, 20, 10. No, it's got to be down there like 1% or less.
Yeah, I think that was the point of the whole 99%, thing, was this idea that there's this group of people who, by hook or crook, and let's face it, man, we talked about this before. If you grow up in a wealthy family, which a lot of these people do, your opportunities are greatly increased. Your capital is increased. Your need for debt is decreased massively, which is, again, that's how another way that they say, well, you still want to buy all that stuff? Well, here, we'll do it on credit. Oh, great. Now we own you 2 ways, at your job and through this credit. So, I mean, I agree. I think it is a low number because, I mean, even somebody who becomes like a CEO, not every company pays you $100 million. I mean, a lot of them you're getting like $1 million, which is still a ton of money, but
high 6 figures or something.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's a ton of money, but is that like common? No, most of the common jobs I think they say that the average salary of a person in the U.S. is like $32,000. And so, I mean, that is not even enough to live on in this country.
No, it's not. But what's really interesting to me, every time they give figures out like that, we think it's low. But for the average to be 30,000, that means that number is so skewed towards the high point that like the lower point of the curve is so much lower than 30 that it would just make you sick to your stomach.
Yeah.
You understand that?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I mean, if it's 30, it's not like everybody's making like 20 and 70 and that makes it 30. No, that means the people that are on the low end of the scale are so low that it's just every time I see that figure, I can't even compute it. I mean, people in Austin, Texas, the absolute cheapest, just shittiest 1-bedroom apartment around town you can get is probably $900 a month.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's a percentage of, that's an average in the U.S., right? I mean, around the world, it's
so
like.
Let's, a lot of people that make money might have to, ask themselves, how the hell can people do it? They take on roommates. They don't eat. They work 3 jobs. I know everybody I work with professionally here in Austin that is kind of a service industry person. They all work 3 jobs, Pat. 3 jobs. And there's just no time to innovate or plan for a future when you're that exhausted. And that's one of the first things you touched on at the very beginning of the podcast. How can you get a leg up or even think or plan or read or study or anything when you're working 3 or 4 jobs, maybe 3 jobs a day, dude?
Yeah, well, and I think that's it, right? I mean, I think this is where socialism has sort of a hold on people's what do I want to call it? Like their imagination is like, well, maybe, this is what I'm seeing nowadays is like people are starting to think like, yeah, like I can't realize myself. I can't know myself. I don't have even I barely have time to go to the bathroom in the day.
Well, funny enough, in this current presidential campaign, specifically Andrew Yang, but all kinds of people all over the country are talking about the UBI, the Universal Basic Income. Yeah. And one of the things that people are really kind of talking about that kind of resonates with me, I'm kind of undecided on the issue, that I would tend to lean towards the for group, is that the universal basic income can help us address just our most basic needs to where we're not starving. And I'm going to use starving. I don't mean literally, but to where we're not going hungry. So we're not doing without food.
I'm sorry.
Once this kind of just base needs are met, then you can actually kind of start to have an imagination and start to imagine or envision a future, or maybe study a little bit, or maybe alter your course and truly spend some of your time bettering yourself, so you can better your skill set, so you can actually live a fulfilling life that's not just just in debt and basically being a slave.
Yeah, and I was just going to interject, and it at least takes one or one and a half of those jobs off the table. And I mean, geez, it's really sad to me. I mean, to think that that's going on, but I know it is. It's like rampant in our country.
Do we want our citizens and our citizens citizens kind of is a weird word sometimes, but our fellow humans, do we want to give people just in general an opportunity to fulfill their highest potential, or are we comfortable just seeing everyone around us just floundering and not even getting a chance to dream or fulfill any sort of potential just because they're living in the matrix?
Yeah, man. It makes me think of this idea that well, I lost my train of thought, but what were you saying just now?
Do we want our fellow humans to get a chance to fulfill their highest potentials, or are we just comfortable and satisfied with the fact that almost no one's getting to become a fully realized person these days because they're slaves living in the matrix? Right,
and so that was what I remember now. What I was going to say is like, this is one of those arguments against socialism, is they say, well, you don't want to help the poor, you just hate the rich. And so this is another talking point propaganda piece that's used to say, well, this is what they are. This is what socialists are. And I think, to your point, that's where it needs to be to really start getting a ball rolling, in my mind, is there a genuine sense of compassion for those that don't have anything? Like, we're talking people that, we want to close our borders. We want to throw these people in these weird prisons at the border, and then we blame them and say they're bad people. And it's like, man, they have nothing.
They're refugees. They're political refugees.
And you would do the same damn thing if your family was in that desperate set. You would do anything you could to make that happen. So it's like, to your point, yes, I think that's where the rubber meets the road. If we can get to that point where we really do care about the welfare of those people and not just hate the rich for having all their money, we could start making some of those gradual changes. Like you said, I think it's going to be a long time.
Okay, I want to touch on the whole thing about hating the rich, because that's really screwed up with the media and probably a lot of people in their conversations. When people talk about hating the rich, I think hate is too strong a word. First of all, I think people hate cheating and injustice and criminal activity. But number two, the people that they despise are not you're kind of working rich around America. They're not the millionaires that surround us in Austin, that live in Westlake and out on Lake Travis. These are not the people we're talking about. We're
Right.
talking about the richest people on the planet, the richest families in the planet with such concentrated wealth and resources where they can pretty much make anything happen on this earth, on this planet, and they can pretty much make any message be spread throughout the entire media of the planet and basically make people believe a certain thing. These are the people that we are working against. But when Americans, who just believe in everybody working their way to the top, they're thinking of like your neighbor down the street that's rich. That is not who we're talking about, Pat. So we need to make that clear. Those people are not the problem because they don't even have enough money. There's different levels of rich.
Right.
Like there's the rich, there's the super rich, and there's the just throw up in your mouth extreme rich. So let's make that distinction. And finally, I just want to make that point. But here, let's get back home. This I think this is kind of the final thing I want to discuss here. Let's go back to socialism, and instead of talking about socialism as just like a huge, a governmental system or societal system, let's go back to what is socialism. Like, say, if we're here in America, we have, a lot of people use maybe the public library system, the police, the firemen, stuff like that as examples of successful socialism in America. So say we are going to just kind of continue with our kind of capitalist, socialist blend and improve upon it. What socialist programs should we enact, assuming we're not going to be an entirely socialist country? And we've already talked about Medicare for all. Are there any other things that you would really like to see happen, or
I think the biggest one for me, because it could have such a widespread effect, is free education.
Okay.
Free education is so doable. I mean, if we took 130 million, or no, if we took 130 billion dollars off of of what we spend on military every year, and put that towards education, we could give free education to this country.
Yeah.
Now that's a lot of money, but when we already spend 700 billion dollars on, and if we took off 150, if we even took off 300 billion, we'd still be spending more than every other country combined. So, I think that's seems like a no-brainer.
So your answer to how you're going to pay for it, which is the instantaneous knee-jerk refrain from everybody, that every time you propose a new government program, your recommendation would be to transfer a tiny slice from the military budget towards education. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, and I think that's an AOC thing, right? It
is, and it's a lot of people, but this story is never told.
Right.
I mean,
and it's such an easy thing. It's because she makes the point, and it's been made before, but I think she did a great job of making it. Is no one says where's that? How are you going to pay for it when they say here we're going to spend this much on military?
Yeah,
it's it's a non-issue.
Well, they don't say that when you're going to start a new war either.
Well, exactly. Like who's going to do this? Who's going to pay for it?
So here we have two really important universal. Lofty universal goals of education and healthcare. That's not really particularly controversial to me. I don't know about you.
No, I mean, and I think there is some widespread support there. Again, you talked about like how do you phrase the question, but there was a specifically phrased questions that I've seen in a statistic where they said, okay, would you support, Medicare or Medicaid for everyone and free education, and it was like 70%. So that's obviously you're getting all of the liberal, progressive, socialist types, plus you're getting some conservative types too. The other thing that I think that is crucial to all of this, and it's probably the hardest thing that will ever happen, is making the people that are those throw up in your mouth rich pay their fair share of fucking taxes. Yeah. That's where you're going to get untold amount of money, and closing down those overseas or offshore accounts and things like that. It'll never happen, but I think it's a damn
Well,
goal.
it will never happen completely, but it could happen one at a time, and it could happen there and there. And I love it that you raised that last point, because I think this is probably a good point to end on. Here's the deal, folks. The electoral system is broken. You are not going to elect a governor or representative or president or senator or anybody that is going to fix these problems for us. It's going to take mass mobilizations of people, mass organizing, and civil disobedience, and some form of social unrest. There is no way they're going to give us what we want until we demand it. Remember, change is never gifted from the top down. It is always demanded from the bottom up. And if you look at the history of social change in the world, the last couple hundred years, all the big leap forwards we have had have become from mass mobilizations of people demanding change. We have that opportunity still. And I don't know, well, I do know why. There's a big problem in America. It's called the extremely militarized police force that's keeping people at bay. And I'm really not sure how it's going to play out. You have any thoughts on that?
I think that would be a great topic for another podcast.
Well, I was really kind of hoping that would lead into maybe our next podcast.
Which I think it could. Let's end on that note, and thank everybody that is listening, if there are any out there, for this first podcast of Pie the Corner. And always great to talk to you, Shane. And I think that will be a good topic for the next podcast. How is our militarized police force helped create that divide in our country?
Okay, good deal. Well, it's great talking with you, Pat. I think we did a pretty good job tonight. Let's go ahead and wrap it up, and we'll give it a listen and see how we can improve, and hopefully talk to you folks next time.
See you later.
Ciao. Pie the Corner.